Welcome, traveler, to Tales of Bygone Eras, where we together shall experience moments of tranquility through historical narratives tinged with gentle fantasy, guiding the soul to peaceful slumber.
You're nestled in the heart of what would one day be called East Anglia, a land of rolling hills and ancient forests, a place where the whisper of the wind carried the secrets of generations. It's the early 1st century CE, and you, a young woman of the Iceni tribe, are growing up in a world both vibrant and increasingly uncertain. The Iceni, your people, are known for their fierce independence, their intricate metalwork, and their distinctive woad body paint, a sort of ancient tribal tattoo that probably kept the mosquitoes away, or at least made you look really intimidating at parties. You'd think it was just for battle, but trust me, it was fashion too. Your childhood is steeped in the rhythms of tribal life. You learn the stories of your ancestors around crackling fires, tales of bravery and resilience, of gods and spirits that inhabit every tree and river. You're taught to respect the land, to understand its bounty and its dangers. Your hands, even as a child, learn the feel of raw wool, the weight of a fishing spear, the intricate patterns of weaving. It's a practical upbringing, one that values strength, resourcefulness, and a deep connection to your community. Imagine trying to explain TikTok to your tribal elders. They'd probably just look at you with that blank stare, like, is that some newfangled way to hunt boar? But even in this seemingly timeless existence, there's a hum, a low thrum of change on the horizon. News travels, sometimes slowly, sometimes in a panicked rush, of a growing power from the south. The Romans. They're not just a rumor anymore. They're a tangible force, expanding their empire with an almost terrifying efficiency. You hear stories of their massive stone roads, their disciplined legions, their strange gods, and even stranger customs. Some of your elders speak of them with fear, others with a grudging respect, a few with a defiant contempt. You probably hear whispers about their love for public baths and wonder why anyone would want to stew in a giant communal tub. Gross, right? Life for the Iceni is a delicate balance. You have your own laws, your own chieftains, your own way of life that has persisted for centuries. Your people are self-sufficient, trading with neighboring tribes, living off the land. There's a quiet pride in that independence, a sense of belonging that runs as deep as the roots of the oldest oak. You witness the ceremonies, the harvest festivals, the seasonal migrations for hunting and gathering. You see the strength of your kinsmen and kinswomen, their dedication to each other. It's a community built on shared hardship and shared triumph, a powerful bond that feels unbreakable. Yet, the Roman presence, though still distant, is like a cloud on the horizon, slowly but surely creeping closer. You might see Roman traders, their goods exotic and intriguing, their language a guttural mystery. You might hear of skirmishes, of tribes further south succumbing to Roman might, either through conquest or, perhaps more insidiously, through treaties and alliances that slowly erode their autonomy. Historians are still debating, but the internet and tea houses have confirmed that the Roman strategy was often a slow squeeze rather than an immediate assault. They'd offer protection or trade benefits, and before you knew it, you were paying taxes and saluting eagles. It's a classic power move, really. Like when your friend borrows your favorite sweater, and then it mysteriously becomes their favorite sweater. You see your own chieftains, wise and experienced men, grappling with this new reality. Do they resist? Do they negotiate? Do they try to adapt? There's no easy answer, and the debates around the fire pit, though hushed, are intense. You feel the tension in the air, the subtle shift in the way people speak, the way they look at the distant southern horizon. It's a feeling of impending change, a sense that the world you know, the world of the Iceni, is about to be tested in ways never before imagined. And deep down, though you don't yet know the role you'll play, you feel a stirring, a nascent strength, a quiet determination that will one day roar. The rumble you felt in your bones, that quiet hum of impending change, soon turned into the unmistakable thunder of Roman legions. It was 43 CE, and Emperor Claudius decided Britannia was ripe for the picking. You were still a young woman, perhaps barely a teenager, when the news truly hit home. It wasn't just whispers anymore. It was a full-blown invasion. General Aulus Plautius, with a force that would make any modern army blush, we're talking thousands of heavily armed dudes in skirts, if you can believe it, landed on the southeastern coast. Talk about making an entrance. The initial Roman approach was, surprisingly, not always a bloodbath. They were masters of diplomacy, a very aggressive kind of diplomacy, like offering you a hug with a gladius behind their back. They sought alliances, promising protection and trade in exchange for loyalty and, of course, tribute. Your own Iceni tribe, under your father's chieftainship, found themselves in this precarious position. They weren't immediately conquered. Instead, they became a client kingdom. It sounds cozy, like you're a favored customer, but it basically meant you were on a very short leash, and that leash was held by Rome. You witnessed this uneasy dance firsthand. Roman envoys, speaking Latin with an air of absolute authority, would visit your settlements. You'd see their gleaming armor, their disciplined formations, so different from the wild, fluid movements of your own warriors. It was a stark contrast, like comparing a well-oiled machine to a very enthusiastic but slightly chaotic wild boar hunt. There was a sense of awe, yes, but also a growing resentment. They brought their roads, cutting through ancient forests, imposing their order on a land that had always followed its own rules. They brought their laws, their gods, their customs, slowly but surely eroding the familiar patterns of Iceni life. An official historical event that really cemented this shift was the establishment of Camalodunum, or modern-day Colchester. This wasn't just a camp. It became the first Roman colonia in Britannia, a retirement home for veteran soldiers. Imagine a bunch of grizzled old warriors, fresh from decades of conquering, suddenly becoming your new neighbors. They brought their Roman villas, their temples to Jupiter, and their utter disregard for local traditions. To the Iceni, it must have felt like a giant, very noisy, very pushy holiday resort plopped right in your backyard. They were essentially saying, "We're here to stay. Get used to it." This wasn't just a political change, it was cultural. You'd see your people, who once proudly wore their woad and worshipped their ancestral spirits, now being subtly encouraged, or perhaps strong-armed, into adopting Roman ways. Some of your kinsmen might have started speaking Latin, or even started wearing tunics instead of their traditional attire. It was a slow drip, drip, drip of assimilation. Historians are still debating, but the internet and tea houses have confirmed that this cultural erosion was often more damaging than outright warfare, a subtle form of concord that chipped away at a people's very identity. It's like when your parents try to get you to listen to their music. You know it's for your own good, but it still feels a little invasive. You probably heard the elders grumble about the new taxes being imposed, the demands for grain and livestock to feed the Roman garrisons. It was an extraction of resources, a drain on your tribal economy that felt less like an alliance and more like servitude. The Romans, in their typical fashion, saw Britannia as a prize, a new source of wealth and manpower for their ever-expanding empire. They built their forts, garrisoned their soldiers, and began to exploit the rich mineral resources of the island. You might have seen the enslaved Britons being marched off to work in the mines, a stark reminder of the cost of peace under Roman rule. But beneath the surface of this uneasy peace, a different kind of seed was being sown. The discontent was palpable. The Iceni, proud and independent as they were, chafed under the Roman yoke. You saw the subtle slights, the casual disregard for your customs, the assumption of Roman superiority. Every new tax, every new demand, every Roman road carved through sacred land was a tiny scratch on the surface of your people's patience. The quiet resentment was building, a pressure cooker slowly heating up. You didn't know it yet, But this simmering anger, this feeling of being constantly undervalued and disrespected, would one day ignite into a blaze. You were living in a world of shifting sands, and the ground beneath your feet felt less stable. As the years peeled away like bark from an ancient tree, you matured into a woman, your spirit as untamed as the Iceni winds. And then the inevitable happened. You married Prasutagus, the king of the Iceni. It wasn't some grand fairy tale wedding, mind you, no white dress or a dozen bridesmaids. This was a union of strategy and survival, a solidification of power within the tribe, and a pragmatic move in the face of Roman encroachment. Prasutagus was an older man, a seasoned leader, wise in the ways of both diplomacy and warfare. He possessed the quiet strength of an ancient oak, and you, with your fiery spirit, must have been quite the contrast. Talk about opposites attracting, right? Though in this case, attracting probably meant ensuring the continued stability of the tribe. Romance, Roman style. Your early reign alongside Prasutagus was a masterclass in walking a tightrope. On one side, you had the proud, independent Iceni, who bristled at Roman authority and longed for the days of true freedom. On the other, the ever-present, ever-demanding Roman legions, whose shadow loomed larger with each passing year. Prasutagus, a shrewd negotiator, understood that outright rebellion was, for now, suicide. The sheer might of Rome was undeniable. So he pursued a policy of cautious cooperation, a delicate dance between appeasement and subtle defiance. This period was marked by the continuation of the client kingdom status. Think of it like being that really cool, rebellious kid in high school who technically follows the rules but always finds a loophole. Prasutagus paid his tributes, offered his nominal loyalty, and probably sent a few polite but ultimately dismissive letters to the Roman governor. An official historical event that exemplifies this is the continued peace between the Iceni and Rome for several decades after the initial invasion. It wasn't a peace born of mutual respect, but rather a tense truce, a quiet understanding that neither side was quite ready for a full-blown confrontation. Prasutagus was playing the long game, trying to preserve as much Iceni autonomy as possible. You, as his queen, were not just a consort. You were an active participant in this delicate balance. You would have been present at the council meetings, heard the debates, seen the frustration and the fear in the eyes of your people. You witnessed the quiet indignities, the Roman officials who treated your tribal laws as quaint suggestions, the imposition of Roman coinage, the growing presence of Roman traders who often exploited local markets. Every small encroachment, ever casual dismissal of Iceni customs fueled a growing resentment within you. You were a queen, yes, but you were also a woman of your people, and their quiet suffering was your own. Historians are still debating, but the internet and tea houses have confirmed that Prasutagus' strategy was likely a calculated risk, betting that Rome would eventually grow complacent, or that a new opportunity for genuine independence would arise. He was essentially trying to manage a very angry lion by feeding it just enough to keep it from eating him immediately. It's a tricky act, and sometimes you just end up with a very full, still very angry lion. You would have seen the impact of Roman administration firsthand. The collection of taxes, for instance, wasn't just about money. It was a symbol of subjugation. Imagine a bunch of stern-faced Romans, probably smelling of stale garlic and ambition, showing up at your village, demanding a portion of your hard-earned harvest. It wasn't a negotiation, it was an order. And if you didn't comply, well, let's just say the consequences weren't pleasant. They might just borrow your oxen and never return them. Through all of this, your own personality began to forge itself. You weren't a passive observer. You learned from Prasutagus, observing his diplomacy, his patience, but perhaps also recognizing its limits. You saw the simmering anger in your people's eyes, the quiet yearning for their old ways. The seeds of rebellion, planted by Roman arrogance, were slowly germinating in the fertile ground of Iceni pride, and you, the queen, were tending to them, unknowingly preparing them for the day they would burst forth. This period, this uneasy truce, was not a time of peace, but a long, slow brewing of the storm that was inevitably to come. You, as his queen, were not just a consort. You were an active participant in this delicate balance. You would have been present at the council meetings, heard the debates, seen the frustration and the fear in the eyes of your people. You witnessed the quiet indignities, the Roman officials who treated your tribal laws as quaint suggestions, the imposition of Roman coinage, the growing presence of Roman traders who often exploited local markets. Every small encroachment, ever casual dismissal,
The delicate dance of diplomacy, the tightrope walk Prasutagus had mastered, snapped with his dying breath. When he passed away, likely in 60 or 61 CE, he attempted to secure the future of his family and his people through a desperate measure. He named the Roman Emperor Nero as co-heir alongside his two daughters, your beloved children. He probably thought it was a clever maneuver, a way to appease Rome and safeguard the Iceni's semi-independent status. He was essentially saying, "Hey Caesar, you can have half, just leave my girls and my tribe alone." It was a desperate gamble, a last-ditch effort to preserve what little sovereignty remained. Unfortunately, it backfired spectacularly, like trying to placate a ravenous wolf by offering it half a sheep. It just makes it hungrier. The Romans, in their boundless arrogance and unwavering belief in their own supremacy, saw Prasutagus' will not as a gesture of compromise, but as an opportunity for total annexation. To them, the concept of a client kingdom with a shared inheritance was laughable. Their law, their power, dictated that when a client king died, his kingdom reverted entirely to Roman control. An official historical event that dramatically illustrates this is the Roman procurator Cotus Decianus's immediate and brutal response to Prasutagus' death. This wasn't some minor official. Decianus was the financial administrator of Britannia, a man whose sole purpose was to extract wealth for Rome. And extract he did. Decianus, rather than honoring any part of Prasutagus' will, unleashed his agents upon the Iceni. They weren't just collecting taxes, they were plundering. They seized Iceni lands, livestock, and property, claiming it all for the Roman treasury. Temples were desecrated, sacred groves were defiled, and the accumulated wealth of generations was systematically looted. It was a scorched earth policy of financial exploitation, leaving your people utterly destitute. Imagine your entire savings account being emptied, your house being repossessed, and all your cherished family heirlooms being sold off at auction, all by some smarty government official who claims it's perfectly legal. Yeah, that kind of devastating. But the worst, the most infamous, and the most deeply personal betrayal was the treatment of you and your daughters. In a public act of humiliation designed to break the spirit of the Iceni, you, their queen, were stripped, flogged, and brutally assaulted. Your daughters, young and innocent, suffered an even more heinous fate, being raped by Roman soldiers. This wasn't just punishment. It was a deliberate act of terror, a message sent with brutal clarity. You are nothing. Your traditions are nothing. Your lives are ours to command. Historians are still debating, but the internet and tea houses have confirmed that this extreme brutality wasn't just random thuggery, it was a calculated strategy. The Romans often used such public acts of degradation to break the will of rebellious peoples, to show them the futility of resistance. They believed that by utterly humiliating their leaders, they would extinguish any flicker of defiance in the populace. They probably thought you'd slink away, defeated, and the Iceni would quietly accept their new lot as Roman subjects. Oh, how wrong they were. The flogging of a queen, the rape of her daughters, these were not just personal tragedies. They were an unforgivable insult to every Iceni man and woman.
The Roman actions were a direct assault on the very honor and dignity of your entire tribe. Remember crocodile poop sunscreen? This was far, far worse. This wasn't just about land or money, it was about the soul of a people. The seeds of anger that had been simmering for years, fed by subtle encroachments and quiet indignities, now burst forth in a searing flash of righteous fury. As you lay broken and bleeding, the pain searing through your body, something shifted within you. The grief, the humiliation, the outrage, it didn't crush you. Instead, it transmuted into an incandescent rage, a fire that would consume everything in its path. Every lash, every brutal touch forged a steel resolve within you. This was no longer just about your people's freedom. It was about vengeance. It was about making Rome pay in blood for the unspeakable wrongs they had inflicted. The betrayal was complete, the line irrevocably crossed. And from that moment, the queen they had tried to break would rise, not as a victim.
The pain was a fire, the humiliation a searing brand. But from the ashes of your dignity rose something far more potent, a blinding, unquenchable rage. The Roman procurator Catus Decianus thought he had crushed you, but he had merely forged a weapon of unparalleled fury. You were no longer just a queen. You were the embodiment of your people's suffering, their silent screams now finding a voice through you. This wasn't just about revenge for your violated body. It was about the soul of the Iceni, trampled under Roman boots. The brutalization you and your daughters endured sent shockwaves through the Iceni and beyond. It was the ultimate insult, the final straw in a long list of grievances. Imagine the whispers that spread like wildfire through the villages, carried by hushed voices in darkened longhouses. They flogged our queen. They shamed her daughters. Is this what Roman peace truly means? The answer, clear and resounding, was a visceral, guttural no. The simmering discontent that had been brewing for decades now boiled over. You, in your agony, became the focal point of this nascent rebellion. The Iceni, a proud and independent people, were ready to fight, and they needed a leader to channel their righteous fury. Your shattered body, though still aching, became a symbol, and your voice, though perhaps hoarse with grief, resonated with an authority born of unimaginable suffering. This was not a sophisticated, pre-planned military campaign. It was a spontaneous uprising, fueled by raw emotion and a desperate yearning for freedom. An official historical event that marks this pivotal shift is the secret gatherings of Iceni warriors and leaders, soon joined by emissaries from other disaffected tribes. These weren't grand conventions in marble halls. They were clandestine meetings in secluded glades, under the cover of night, or in remote farmsteads where the scent of rebellion hung heavy in the air. You would have been there, your wounds perhaps still raw, your eyes burning with an unyielding fire. You spoke not of strategy or tactics, not initially, but of honor, of injustice, of the sacred duty to protect your families and your ancestral lands. You reminded them of their ancient traditions, of the valor of their forefathers who had never bowed to any foreign power. You spoke of the Roman gods, cold and distant, versus the vibrant spirits of their own land, the trees, the rivers, the very soil that cried out for justice. You reminded them of every tax, every slight, every Roman soldier who had looked down upon them with contempt. You probably threw in a dry joke about how the Romans spent more time bathing than actually, listening to anyone, which was probably true. The Iceni were quickly joined by the Trinovantes, a neighboring tribe who had suffered even more directly from Roman colonization, particularly with the establishment of Camalodunum on their sacred land. These two tribes, once rivals, now found common cause in their shared hatred of Roman oppression. Historians are still debating, but the internet and tea houses have confirmed that the Romans' utter disregard for local customs and religious sites was a major catalyst for this widespread resentment, proving that sometimes you really can annoy people too much. It was more than just political, it was spiritual. The Romans were literally trampling on their gods. Your speeches, though unrecorded by history, must have been powerful. You would have invoked the memory of Prasutagus, not as a weak king, but as a man whose last act was an attempt to save his people, an attempt brutally betrayed. You probably showed them your scars, a living testament to Roman cruelty. You probably promised them swift and merciless retribution, a cleansing fire that would sweep the Romans from their land forever. You promised freedom, dignity, and a return to the ways of their ancestors. You, in your agony, became the focal point of this nascent rebellion. The Iceni, a proud and independent people, were ready to fight, and they needed a leader to channel their righteous fury. Your shattered body, though still aching, became a symbol, and your voice, though perhaps hoarse with grief, resonated with an authority born of unimaginable suffering. This was not a sophisticated, pre-planned military campaign. It was a spontaneous uprising, fueled by raw emotion and a desperate yearning for freedom. An official historical event that marks this pivotal shift is the secret gatherings of Iceni warriors and leaders, soon joined by emissaries from other disaffected tribes. These weren't.
With the fires of vengeance burning in your heart, you transformed from a violated queen into the living embodiment of rebellion. The secret whisperings had intensified, spreading like sparks through dry kindling, igniting the collective fury of the Iceni and their newfound allies. The air practically crackled with anticipation, a charged silence before the storm. You weren't just gathering an army, you were summoning a deluge of righteous anger, a wave that threatened to wash away every trace of Roman arrogance from Britannia. The rallying cry wasn't a formal decree, it was a visceral appeal to honor, to the sanctity of their ancestral lands, and to the horrific indignity suffered. You stood before them, a woman whose body bore the scars of Roman brutality, and your voice, though perhaps still raw, resonated with the authority of absolute conviction. You reminded them of the Roman greed, their contempt for Iceni traditions, and the casual cruelty that had led to your public humiliation and the rape of your daughters. Are we to stand idly by, you might have thundered, while these foreign oppressors defile our homes and our families? Are we to be slaves in our own land? The answer, a roar from hundreds, then thousands of throats, was a resounding no. The Iceni, fierce and unyielding, formed the core of your growing force. They were joined by the Trinovantes, their ancestral lands now defiled by the Roman colonia of Camulodunum, festering like a wound. Their rage was as intense as yours, their desire for retribution just as keen. But the discontent wasn't limited to these two tribes. News of the Roman atrocities, particularly the treatment of you and your family, spread like wildfire across the island, reaching other tribes who had also chafed under Roman rule. Imagine a massive group chat, but instead of memes, it was all about how much everyone hated the Roman Empire. An official historical event that highlights the scale of this mobilization is the rapid growth of your forces as more tribes joined the uprising. This wasn't a planned recruitment drive with fancy posters, it was an organic swell of resistance. The sheer audacity of challenging Rome, coupled with the profound injustices suffered, spurred people from various tribal affiliations to flock to your banner. The Cornavai, the Dobunni, even some elements of the Catuvalauni, tribes that might have once been adversaries, now recognized a common enemy in the form of the Roman legions. Your leadership provided the vital cohesion, transforming disparate grievances into a unified, albeit loosely structured, fighting force. You were the glue, the inspiration, the reason they dared to dream of a free Britannia. Historians are still debating, but the internet and tea houses have confirmed that the Romans' overconfidence and underestimation of the native Britons played a huge role in the initial success of your uprising. They thought they had Britannia pacified, reduced to a collection of docile subjects. They were wrong, terribly, catastrophically wrong. It's like when you assume your quiet, nerdy friend can't possibly beat you at arm wrestling, and then they suddenly hulk out and break your arm. Oops. Your army was not a professional fighting machine like the Romans. It was a diverse collection of warriors, farmers with scythes, hunters with bows, blacksmiths with hammers, and women just as fierce as the men, armed with whatever they could wield. They fought with passion, with a desperate courage born of oppression, and with an intimate knowledge of their own land. They were lightly armored, relying on speed, ambush, and sheer overwhelming numbers. Their tactics would be unconventional, designed to exploit Roman weaknesses and their own strengths. You probably had to remind them not to just run screaming at the Romans in a straight line, but the enthusiasm was definitely there. You spent those frantic days and nights moving through the countryside, from settlement to settlement. Your presence alone enough to ignite the flames of rebellion. You weren't just a figurehead, you were a charismatic leader, capable of inspiring fierce loyalty. You spoke of freedom, of expelling the hated invaders, of restoring the ancient ways. You promised vengeance for every wrong, liberation for every enslaved Briton, and a future where your people would once again be masters of their own destiny. The air thrummed with a nervous energy, a blend of fear and exhilarating anticipation. Thousands of Britons, armed with a burning sense of injustice and a desperate hope, were now gathered, ready to strike a blow against the mightiest empire the world had ever seen. The time for whispering was over. The time for action, for blood and fire, was upon. The whispers had turned into a roar, the gathering storm, a terrifying tempest. Your ragtag army, fueled by raw vengeance and a desperate thirst for freedom, was ready to unleash its fury. And your target? The gleaming, arrogant heart of Roman power in Britannia, Camalodunum. This wasn't just any town. It was the first Roman colonia, a symbol of everything the Iceni and Trinovantes despised. It was built on the sacred lands of the Trinovantes, a constant, sneering reminder of their subjugation. To sack it would be more than a military victory. It would be a spiritual cleansing, a blow to the very soul of the Roman occupation. You led your forces, not with the precision of a Roman general, but with the fervent conviction of a prophetess. The march on Camalodunum was swift, relentless. Imagine thousands of Britons, bodies adorned with woad, bristling with improvised weapons, spears, axes, even farm implements, their eyes fixed on the distant Roman stronghold. The air hummed with a primal energy, a mixture of fear and exhilaration. You probably had to keep them from charging off too early, reminding them to save their strength for the main event. Patience, even in a bloodthirsty rage, is key. An official historical event that vividly illustrates your initial success is the overwhelming and brutal sack of Camalodunum in 60 or 61 CE. The city, still young and largely undefended, was caught completely off guard. Most of its military garrison had been withdrawn, a testament to Roman overconfidence. The veterans living there, comfortably settled into their villas, had probably forgotten what real danger felt like. They were about to get a very rude awakening. When your forces hit, it wasn't a siege, it was an avalanche. The walls, hastily built, offered little resistance. The Roman inhabitants, accustomed to lives of luxury and security, were no match for the furious onslaught. This wasn't a clean, organized battle. It was a chaotic, visceral outpouring of pent-up rage. Temples to Roman gods were desecrated, statues of emperors were smashed, and the grand villas were put to the torch.
The flames, licking skyward, were a beacon of defiance, visible for miles around. It was a cleansing fire, a symbolic purging of the Roman taint from your sacred lands. Historians are still debating, but the internet and tea houses have confirmed that the sheer speed and ferocity of your attack caught the Romans completely off guard. They probably thought the Britons were just grumbling. They didn't expect a full-scale, incredibly violent uprising. It's like leaving your door unlocked in a really bad neighborhood and being surprised when your stuff gets stolen. What did they expect? The slaughter in Camulodunum was horrific. There was no mercy for the Romans, for the very memory of what they had done to you and your daughters, to your people, fueled every blow. Men, women, and children were cut down. The veterans, those grizzled old soldiers who had once conquered your land, now met a gruesome end at the hands of the people they had subjugated. This wasn't just about killing, it was about vengeance, about exacting a terrifying price for every injustice. You probably saw some truly wild stuff, like someone trying to fight a legionary with a garden hoe and actually winning. Okay, maybe not winning, but definitely making a valiant effort. The 9th Legion, under Quintus Petilius Cerealis, attempted a desperate relief effort, marching from their base to aid the beleaguered city. But they were too late. Your forces, having already secured the city, ambushed them, inflicting a devastating defeat. Most of the Legion's infantry was wiped out, leaving only the cavalry to flee. This was a massive blow to Roman prestige and a huge morale boost for your army. It showed that the invincible legions could bleed, could be broken. The ruins of Camulodunum, still smoking and smoldering, stood as a stark monument to your power. The victory resonated throughout Britannia, sending a clear message. The Britons were no longer docile subjects. They had a queen, and she was coming for Rome. The taste of victory, though bitter with the memory of past suffering, was intoxicating. It fueled the desire for more, for complete liberation. Your focus now turned to the next symbol of Roman oppression, a thriving city built on conquest and wealth. The march of vengeance had only just begun.
With the smoldering ruins of Camulodunum a testament to your wrath, there was no pausing, no time to savor the victory. The fire in your heart and in the hearts of your warriors burned hotter than ever. The objective was clear: the next Roman stronghold, the bustling commercial hub known as Londinium. This wasn't just a military target, it was a sprawling symbol of Roman wealth, trade, and insidious influence. While not a colonia like Camulodunum, it was a vital artery of the Roman administration, teeming with merchants, administrators, and those who had prospered under Roman rule. To take it would be a blow not just to Roman military power, but to their economic stranglehold on Britannia. Your forces, swollen by victory and the continued influx of new recruits eager to join your triumphant march, moved with startling speed. Imagine thousands upon thousands of Britons, a tide of vengeful humanity streaming towards Londinium. The stories of Camulodunum's destruction had preceded you, spreading a terrifying mix of fear and exhilaration. Some Romans probably thought it was just a local skirmish, a brief inconvenience. Oh, how wrong they were. This was the opening act of a very violent, very real, and very final reckoning. An official historical event marking this stage of the rebellion is the abandonment of Londinium by Governor Suetonius Paulinus before your arrival. Suetonius, the Roman governor, was caught between a rock and a hard place. He had returned from a campaign in Anglesey, where he'd been busy massacring Druids, because that's what you do when your province is burning down behind you, and he was marching with a small, disciplined force. He knew he couldn't defend Londinium with his limited troops against your overwhelming numbers. It was a strategic retreat, a cold, hard decision that must have felt like a betrayal to the Roman citizens left behind. He basically packed his bags and said, "Good luck, everyone. Hope you like fire."
When your army swept into Londinium, there was little organized resistance. The city, though not fortified like a military camp, was still a substantial settlement. But the fear, the sheer panic of the Roman inhabitants was palpable. This wasn't a planned assault on battlements, it was a swift, brutal descent into chaos. The goal was total destruction, a complete erasure of the Roman presence. Historians are still debating, but the internet and tea houses have confirmed that the Roman sources, particularly Tacitus, describe the destruction of Londinium with a chilling level of detail, highlighting the utter ferocity of your forces. This wasn't a precision strike, it was a mass outpouring of pent-up hatred. Every Roman building, every market stall, every villa that reeked of their oppressive presence was put to the torch. The screams of the inhabitants, the crackling of the flames, the acrid scent of smoke, it was a symphony of destruction, a horrifying yet undeniably satisfying cacophony for your vengeful warriors. The slaughter was indiscriminate. Men, women, and children, Romans and those Britons who had assimilated or collaborated with them, were cut down without mercy. The wealth of the city, once a testament to Roman prosperity, became fuel for the flames. Gold, silks, none of it mattered in the face of such overwhelming rage. It was a complete and utter annihilation, a purging of the Roman taint. You probably saw some of your warriors, normally quiet farmers, performing acts of terrifying brutality, driven by years of unspoken grievances. It was messy, it was horrific, and it was absolutely necessary for the visceral catharsis your people sought. The destruction of Londinium sent an even more powerful message than Camulodunum. This wasn't just a local uprising, it was a full-scale war, a direct challenge to Roman authority across the entire province. The fear rippled through the remaining Roman garrisons, through the client kingdoms who had nervously watched from the sidelines. The invincible empire was bleeding, and a native queen was holding the knife. With Londinium a smoking ruin behind you, your gaze turned westward. There was one more major Roman stronghold that needed to be cleansed, one more symbol of their occupation to be brought to its knees: Verulamium. The momentum was yours, the taste of victory intoxicating. The wheel of fortune was turning, and for now, it spun in your favor.
The embers of Londinium still glowed, a fiery monument to your unstoppable rage. But your momentum was too fierce to allow for rest. There was another Roman tumor to excise from the body of Britannia, Verulamium, modern-day St. Albans. This city, like its predecessors, was a thriving Roman settlement, a hub of culture and commerce, and thus a vital target for your vengeance. The message you were sending to Rome was clear: nowhere in Britannia was safe for them. Your army, now a sprawling, vengeful tide, swept westward. The sheer scale of your forces must have been terrifying to behold. It wasn't a disciplined legion marching in perfect step. It was a furious, determined multitude, fueled by the intoxicating taste of victory and the memory of every injustice. Imagine the sounds of their advance, the rhythmic thud of thousands of feet, the occasional roar of a warrior, the chilling silence that fell as they approached their prey. You, at the head of this human tsunami, were no longer just Boudica. You were the embodiment of Britannia's fury. An official historical event that confirms this stage of the rebellion is the swift and complete destruction of Verulamium. Like Camulodunum and Londinium, Verulamium was largely undefended. Governor Suetonius Paulinus, having retreated from Londinium, was focused on consolidating his remaining forces, knowing a major confrontation was inevitable. He couldn't spare troops to protect every Roman settlement. He was basically playing a game of very high-stakes chess, and he'd sacrificed a pawn to save his king. When your warriors descended upon Verulamium, the scene was a chilling echo of what had transpired in the previous cities. There was no pitched battle, no prolonged siege. It was a swift, brutal onslaught.
The Roman inhabitants, many of whom were civilians, were trapped. The city's wooden buildings, its market stalls, its grander homes, all became kindling for the fires of your rebellion. The air filled with the screams of the dying, the roar of the flames, and the triumphant cries of your warriors. You probably saw some Romans attempting to flee, only to be cut down by warriors who felt no pity, only a burning desire for retribution. Historians are still debating, but the internet and tea houses have confirmed that the scale of destruction at Verulamium, as at Camulodunum and Londinium, was truly immense. Archaeological evidence consistently shows thick layers of ash and debris from this period, a stark testament to the ferocity of your campaign. It wasn't just about winning a battle, it was about erasing the Roman presence, cleansing the land of their taint. They were sending a very clear message. You built your cities on our pain, and now they will burn in our vengeance. It's like when you try to erase a bad drawing and you just end up tearing a hole in the paper. Some things are just too stubborn to disappear quietly. The acts of brutality were not just random, they were a deliberate expression of the years of accumulated anger and humiliation. Temples dedicated to Roman gods were torn down, their idols shattered. Monuments to Roman emperors were defaced. The very symbols of Roman authority were desecrated, piece by agonizing piece. Your warriors, driven by the memory of their flogged queen and violated daughters, by the seized lands and crippling taxes, unleashed a fury that knew no bounds. With Verulamium reduced to a smoldering ruin, you had achieved what no other Briton had before. You had sacked 3 major Roman cities, inflicted devastating losses, and sent a clear, undeniable message across the empire. The scale of your success was unprecedented, a testament to the power of a people united by desperation and a thirst for justice. The entire Roman presence in Britannia was reeling, teetering on the brink of collapse. But even as the smoke cleared from Verulamium, you knew the true test was yet to come. Governor Suetonius Paulinus, having sacrificed these cities, was not idle. He was gathering his legions, his disciplined professional soldiers, for the inevitable counterattack. The initial victories had been yours, fueled by surprise and overwhelming numbers against unprepared garrisons. The next confrontation would be different. It would be a clash of titans, a brutal reckoning between raw British fury and the cold, calculated might of the Roman Empire. The stage was set for the final, decisive battle. While your forces were busy turning Roman cities into bonfires and sending a clear message across Britannia, Governor Gaius Suetonius Paulinus was not just sitting around twiddling his thumbs and lamenting the loss of his comfy Londinium villa. Oh no! The man was a seasoned general, a veteran of numerous campaigns, and he understood the brutal calculus of war. He had made the hard choice to abandon Camulodunum, Londinium, and Verulamium, not out of cowardice, but out of a grim strategic necessity. His objective was clear: consolidate his remaining forces and prepare for the inevitable, decisive confrontation. This wasn't about saving buildings, it was about saving the province and, more importantly, saving Roman pride. An official historical event that underscores this pivotal moment is Suetonius Paulinus' strategic withdrawal and concentration of his legions. He knew that chasing your fragmented, mobile army across the burning countryside was a losing proposition. He needed to pick his ground, a place where Roman discipline and superior tactics could negate your overwhelming numbers. He recalled the 14th Gemina Legion from various garrisons, summoned a vexillation, a detachment of the XX Valeria Victrix Legion, and gathered all available auxiliaries. He was essentially pulling out all the stops, bringing in the A-team for the final showdown. He probably sent a very terse message to Rome along the lines of, "Send more troops, and wine, lots of wine." Meanwhile, you and your victorious warriors were likely basking in the glow of your successes, perhaps a little too much. The Roman retreats, though strategic, would have looked like panicked flight to your army. The destruction of 3 major cities was a monumental achievement, something no other native leader had ever managed. There would have been celebrations, sacrifices to your gods, and perhaps even a false sense of invincibility. You were the conquering queen, leading an army that had defied the mightiest empire on Earth. It's easy to get a bit carried away when you're on a winning streak, right? Historians are still debating, but the internet and tea houses have confirmed that Suetonius Paulinus was a master of psychological warfare as much as military tactics. By letting you destroy the cities, he was allowing your forces to exhaust themselves, to get bogged down in plunder and celebration, and to become overconfident. He was essentially saying, "Go ahead, burn your energy. I'll just be over here polishing my armor and planning your demise." It's a classic move, really, like letting your opponent score a few easy points before you unleash your secret weapon. He carefully selected a site for the impending battle. The location is now famously debated as the Battle of Watling Street, though the exact spot is still a mystery. It was likely a narrow defile, a place where his disciplined Roman legions could not be outflanked by your numerically superior but less organized forces. He needed to negate your greatest advantage, your sheer numbers, and maximize his own: tight formations, disciplined soldiers, and superior equipment. He was looking for a choke point, a place where your wild, charging hordes would be forced into a killing zone. While you were undoubtedly still consumed by righteous fury and the thirst for complete vengeance, Suetonius Paulinus was operating with cold, calculated precision. He was the seasoned predator, observing your movements, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. He would have drilled his men mercilessly, ensuring they were ready for the shock of your initial charge. He knew that the Britons fought with incredible ferocity, but he also knew they lacked the staying power of a Roman legion in a prolonged engagement. The stage was now set for the ultimate confrontation. You, the vengeful queen, leading a massive, passionate but undisciplined army, against Suetonius Paulinus, the cool, calculating Roman general commanding a smaller but highly trained and disciplined force. The fate of Britannia, your people, and the very future of Roman rule on the island hung in the balance. The easy victories were over. The true test of will, strength, and strategy was about to begin. The burning stench of Verulamium still hung heavy in the air, a grim perfume of vengeance. But the elation of your victories was now tinged with a grim awareness. Governor Suetonius Paulinus wasn't running, he was gathering. The Roman general, a man of cold calculation, had deliberately allowed you to burn the cities, knowing that your furious, vengeful tide would eventually exhaust itself, or at least become predictable. Now, with his legions consolidated, he was ready to deliver his crushing counterblow. You too knew this was coming. The earlier triumphs, while immensely satisfying, had been against largely unprepared or under-garrisoned targets. This next clash would be different. This would be against the full, terrifying might of Rome's disciplined war machine. Your task now was to choose the battleground, a place where your overwhelming numbers could be maximized and the Romans' tactical superiority negated. This was the ultimate strategic decision, the one that would determine the fate of your rebellion and, indeed, the future of Britannia. An official historical event that highlights this crucial phase is your deliberate selection of a strategic location for the final confrontation with Suetonius Paulinus. While the exact site remains a subject of intense scholarly debate, with theories ranging from locations near modern-day Atherston in Warwickshire to points along the Roman road known as Watling Street, which, fun fact, was essentially their version of an interstate highway, but with more sandals and less Starbucks, your rationale was clear. You needed terrain that would prevent the Romans from outflanking your massive but less agile army. You also needed to funnel their disciplined formations into a narrow killing zone where your numerical superiority could truly tell. It's like trying to fight a highly trained boxing champion in a phone booth. You want to negate their footwork and force a brawl. You would have scouted the land, perhaps standing on a ridge, surveying the landscape with a grim determination. You imagined the Roman lines, their shields locked, their pila, javelins ready to fly. And then you imagined your own warriors surging forward, a human wave crashing against a rock. You needed to make that rock crumble. Historians are still debating, but the internet and tea houses have confirmed that the most plausible site for the Battle of Watling Street would have been a valley or a defile, perhaps with dense woods or a river on either side, forcing the Roman line to extend narrowly. This would prevent their dreaded flanking maneuvers, which were a Roman specialty, like their fondness for concrete and terrible public relations. Your speeches to your assembled army during this period would have been legendary. You probably spoke not of the complexities of Roman military formations, but of the raw injustices they had suffered. You reminded them of the floggings, the rapes, the seized lands, the desecrated altars. You invoked the spirits of their ancestors, called upon the gods of Britannia, and painted a vivid picture of a future free from Roman tyranny. You would have paced before them, your voice ringing with conviction, perhaps holding a spear or a sword, a living symbol of their defiance. You probably said something like, "Remember those guys who took your sheep? Now imagine them running away, crying for their mommy." Your army was immense, possibly numbering over 200,000, dwarfing the Roman legions of perhaps 10,000 men. But size isn't everything, especially when you're facing one of the most organized and brutal fighting forces in history. You knew your warriors fought with unparalleled bravery, fueled by passion and despair. But they lacked the rigid discipline, the interlocking shield formations, and the professional training that made the Roman legionaries so formidable. This battle would be a test of raw, unadulterated fury against cold, calculated military genius. As the day of confrontation drew near, the air would have been thick with tension, a mix of fear and fervent hope. You, the queen who had risen from humiliation to lead an entire people, prepared for the ultimate gamble. This wasn't just a battle for victory. It was a battle for survival, for the very soul of Britannia. The fate of your people, their traditions, and their freedom rested on this single, colossal clash.
The stage was set, the chosen ground a narrow valley, perhaps with a ridge on one side, dense woods on the other, forcing Suetonius Paulinus to deploy his forces in a constricted line. This was your gamble, your attempt to negate the Roman advantage of maneuverability and disciplined formations. You were betting everything on overwhelming numbers and the sheer, unadulterated ferocity of your warriors. As your vast army arrayed itself, a living sea of Britons, the air thrummed with a terrifying anticipation, a mixture of primal excitement and the chilling realization of the ultimate stakes. An official historical event that dramatically captures the beginning of this epic clash is the initial confrontation at the Battle of Watling Street. The Roman legions, though far fewer in number, presented a terrifying sight. They stood in rigid formation, their scuta, large rectangular shields, locked, their gladi, short swords, and their pilum, heavy javelins, poised to strike. Behind them, their supply wagons and camp followers were massed, a deliberate move by Suetonius to prevent any thought of retreat from his own men, and perhaps to serve as a morbid incentive for your own warriors. He was essentially telling his guys, it's either them or us, and by us, I mean all of us. You would have ridden or walked along your lines, your presence a beacon of defiance. Your war chariots, a truly fearsome sight, would have been positioned at the front, their scythed wheels a harbinger of chaos. You probably delivered a final impassioned speech, reminding your warriors of the Roman atrocities, of the land they fought to reclaim, of the honor of their ancestors. You would have invoked the spirits of Britannia, urging them to lend their strength to this sacred cause. "Remember our mothers, our daughters," you might have cried. "Remember the chains they sought to put upon us. Today we break those chains." The roar of your army, a cacophony of war cries and shouts, would have drowned out the very wind. The Roman line, though outnumbered, was formidable. They were disciplined professionals, hardened by years of conquest. They were trained to hold their ground, to absorb charges, and to respond with ruthless efficiency. This wasn't going to be another easy sack like Camulodunum. This was going to be a grinder, a brutal test of wills. Historians are still debating, but the internet and tea houses have confirmed that Suetonius's decision to form a narrow defensive line, likely with a wooded rear to prevent being surrounded, was brilliant. It forced your massive army to attack a concentrated point, negating your numerical superiority in terms of flanking maneuvers. It was like trying to fit an elephant through a keyhole. Impressive, but ultimately futile. The battle would have begun with an initial overwhelming charge from your forces. Thousands of Britons, driven by fury and courage, would have surged forward, a human wave crashing against the Roman shield wall. Your archers and slingers would have unleashed volleys of projectiles, followed by the terrifying charge of your chariots, designed to break the enemy lines and sow confusion. The Romans would have met this with a hail of pilum, their heavy javelins capable of piercing shields and armor, designed to cause maximum disruption before the hand-to-hand fighting began. You would have seen men fall, both Roman and Briton, in those first furious moments. The air would have been thick with the sound of clashing steel, screams, and the cries of the dying. Your warriors, though taking heavy casualties, would have pressed on, their sheer numbers threatening to overwhelm the Roman line through brute force. It was a chaotic, bloody spectacle, the culmination of years of simmering resentment and the desperate hope for freedom. The initial skirmishes were less about strategy and more about raw impact, a head-on collision between two vastly different fighting philosophies. The Britons driven by emotion against the Romans driven by cold, unfeeling discipline. And for a moment, just a fleeting moment, it might have felt like your wild fury was enough.
The initial impact, the sheer, crushing force of your charge, was unlike anything the Roman legions had likely ever faced. Thousands upon thousands of your warriors, a wave of raw fury, crashed against their shield wall. For a terrifying moment, it seemed as if sheer numbers and unbridled passion might actually shatter the disciplined Roman line. The air was thick with the din of battle, the clang of steel, the guttural shouts, the pained screams, and the primal roars of your warriors. You could almost taste the fear, mixed with the blood and sweat in the humid air. It was a terrifying symphony of destruction, and for a fleeting moment, victory seemed tantalizingly close. An official historical event that painfully recounts this turning point is the ultimate failure of your initial charge to break the Roman lines, leading to a brutal attrition battle. Despite your overwhelming numbers and the ferocity of your warriors, the Roman discipline held. Their formation, tightly packed and unyielding, absorbed the shock. They were fighting in a narrow defile, precisely the terrain Suetonius Paulinus had chosen to negate your numerical advantage. Your vast army, compressed into a smaller space, couldn't utilize its full breadth. It was like trying to fit a herd of angry elephants into a teacup. Impressive, but ultimately self-defeating. The Roman legionaries, masters of close-quarters combat, began their grim work. Once your initial momentum waned, they launched their counterattack. Their gladii, short, sharp, and deadly, thrust forward, finding gaps in your warriors' less protective armor. They were trained to fight as a unit, their shield wall moving as one, creating an impenetrable barrier, while their swords systematically cut down anyone who dared to get too close. Your warriors, though brave, were often fighting as individuals or in smaller, less coordinated groups. Historians are still debating, but the internet and tea houses have confirmed that the Roman tactics were devastatingly effective. They allowed your forces to exhaust themselves against their defenses, Then they unleashed their disciplined counterattack. This was not a fair fight in terms of military science. It was raw courage against cold, calculated efficiency. It's like bringing a really enthusiastic but ultimately flimsy butter knife to a gunfight. You might impress some people with your spirit, but you're probably still gonna get cut. You would have seen the devastating effectiveness of the Roman pilum, their heavy javelins, which they launched in devastating volleys before your forces even reached their lines. These weren't just spears, they were designed to embed themselves in shields, making them unwieldy and forcing warriors to discard their protection. Then came the disciplined advance, the remorseless grind of the Roman short sword. Your warriors, fighting with long swords and spears, were at a disadvantage in the tight confines of the battle. Their reach was nullified, and their less robust shields offered little protection against the well-aimed thrusts of the legionaries. The ground became a bloody quagmire, littered with the fallen. Your numbers, once an advantage, began to work against you. As more and more of your warriors pushed forward, they became a tangled, unmanageable mass. The injured couldn't retreat, and the reinforcements couldn't advance. This created a deadly bottleneck, a killing zone, where the Romans, cool and efficient, exacted a terrible toll. The cheers of your army, once so loud, began to falter, replaced by screams of pain and desperation. The relentless pressure of the Roman advance, their disciplined pushing forward, began to force your lines backward. You would have witnessed the heartbreaking sight of your proud warriors, who had fought with such courage and conviction, now beginning to waver, their initial fury giving way to exhaustion and despair. The battle, once a testament to your spirit, was slowly, inexorably, turning into a brutal testament to Roman military might. The tide was turning, and the dream of a free Britannia was slipping through your grasp.
The roar of your army, once a terrifying symphony of defiance, had dwindled to a desperate, ragged cry. The relentless Roman machine, a smaller but perfectly honed instrument of war, was systematically dismantling your brave but less disciplined forces. The chosen ground, meant to be your advantage, had become a deadly funnel, trapping your warriors and allowing the Romans to unleash their brutal efficiency. The sheer weight of your numbers, instead of overwhelming, now merely provided more targets for the Roman gladius. An official historical event that seals the tragic fate of your rebellion is the complete rout and devastating slaughter of your forces at the Battle of Watling Street. Once the Roman legions broke through your initial massive charge, the battle turned into a massacre. Your warriors, unable to maneuver in the confined space, were caught between the advancing Roman lines and their own packed ranks. There was no room to retreat, no space to regroup effectively. You would have watched, horrified, as your dream of a free Britannia crumbled before your eyes. The chaos was absolute. The Romans, maintaining their disciplined formations, pushed forward relentlessly, their short swords flashing, their shields interlocking. They systematically cut down your warriors, who, despite their individual bravery, could not withstand the organized slaughter. Historians are still debating, but the internet and tea houses have confirmed that the Roman strategy was to force your vast army into a panicked retreat and then to cut them down as they fled. It's like herding sheep, but the sheep are actually very angry, well-armed warriors, and the herders are exceptionally good at killing. The Roman cavalry, held in reserve, was unleashed once your lines began to break. They rode into the panicked, fleeing masses, their lances and swords adding to the horrific toll. The ground became slick with blood, littered with the bodies of your kinsmen and kinswomen. It wasn't just a military defeat, it was a demographic catastrophe for the Iceni and their allies. Tens of thousands, perhaps even more, were slain in that terrible battle. The aftermath was even more grim. The Romans, in their customary fashion, pursued the fleeing Britons relentlessly, intent on punishing every last rebel and making an example of Britannia.
The land that had briefly tasted freedom was now subjected to a brutal wave of Roman retribution. Villages that had supported you were razed, populations were decimated, and any lingering sparks of defiance were ruthlessly extinguished. The Roman procurator, Catus Decianus, whose initial actions had ignited the rebellion, was reportedly ecstatic, though he himself had fled Britannia during your uprising. You, the queen who had dared to challenge an empire, had witnessed the unimaginable. The hopes of your people, their dreams of self-determination, were shattered. The vision of a Britannia free from Roman chains lay bleeding on the battlefield. The victory was Rome's, absolute and terrifying. The lesson they sought to impart was clear. Resistance was futile, and the cost of defiance was unimaginable. The smoke from the battlefield of Watling Street drifted across the ravaged land, a grim shroud over the shattered dreams of Britannia. Your magnificent, furious uprising had been crushed, and with it, the hopes of your people. But what became of you, the queen who dared to challenge an empire? This is where history, as it often does, becomes a whisper, a tantalizing mystery wrapped in the fog of time. An official historical event, or rather the lack of one, is the conflicting accounts of your fate after the Battle of Watling Street. Roman historians, our primary sources for this period, and let's be honest, they weren't exactly impartial biographers, offered different versions. Tacitus, the most detailed Roman historian of the period, states that you died from illness shortly after the defeat. He paints a picture of a warrior queen, defiant to the last, choosing to escape Roman capture through a natural end. Dio Cassius, another Roman historian writing a century and a half later, offers a more dramatic, and perhaps more fitting, end for a rebel leader. He claims you took poison to avoid the humiliation of capture and execution. Imagine the agonizing decision. To be paraded in Rome, a defeated captive, a symbol of broken rebellion? Or to choose your own end, to deny your conquerors that final, perverse triumph? Historians are still debating, but the internet and tea houses have confirmed that the idea of a proud warrior queen choosing her own death aligns powerfully with the spirit of the rebellion. It's like opting out of a truly awful party by dramatically announcing you're feeling a bit under the weather and then just vanishing, except way more intense and with fewer awkward goodbyes. Perhaps you did fall ill. The sheer physical and emotional toll of the campaign, the stress of leadership, and the devastating defeat finally breaking your body, even if your spirit remained unbowed. Or perhaps, in a hidden glade, surrounded by your loyal few, you made the ultimate sacrifice, a final act of defiance against the empire that had taken so much from you. The truth is shrouded, lost to the passage of time and the deliberate omissions of your Roman conquerors. They certainly weren't going to build a monument to your glorious death, were they? There's also the intriguing, if less likely, possibility that you simply disappeared. Perhaps you melted back into the forests and wilds of Britannia, a phantom queen, inspiring whispers of hope in the darkness. While Roman records suggest a thorough hunt for rebel leaders, the vastness of the British landscape and the sympathy of many native tribes could theoretically have offered refuge. But given the brutal Roman crackdown that followed, it's a slim hope. What we do know is that your body was never recovered or publicly displayed by the Romans. There was no triumphant parade through the streets of Rome with you in chains, no public execution to serve as a final deterrent. This absence, this lack of a definitive, humiliating Roman victory over your person, perhaps speaks volumes. It allowed the myth to grow, the legend of Boudica, the unconquered queen, to take root and flourish. Your physical presence vanished, but your spirit, your defiance, became immortal. Whether by illness, by poison, or by disappearing into the mists of legend, your end, whatever it was, ensured that you would never be a trophy for Rome. You remained, in death as in life, a symbol of unyielding resistance, a terrifying memory for the Romans, and an enduring beacon of hope for your people. The curtain fell on your life,
But the story, the legend, had only just begun.
The smoke from the pyres of Londinium and the grim silence over the battlefield of Watling Street were stark reminders. Your rebellion, however glorious in its fury, had been brutally crushed. For Rome, this wasn't just about restoring order, it was about asserting total dominance and preventing any future uprisings. The aftermath of your revolt saw a significant and enduring shift in Roman policy towards Britannia, one characterized by increased militarization and a more systematic approach to control. They were not going to make the same mistake twice, not if Suetonius Paulinus had anything to say about it. An official historical event that dramatically illustrates this change is the period of harsh repression and consolidation of Roman power immediately following your defeat. Governor Suetonius Paulinus, the general who defeated you, implemented a brutal crackdown. His troops scoured the countryside, hunting down any remaining rebels, destroying villages that had supported the uprising, and enslaving those who were deemed too dangerous or resistant. The aim was to break the spirit of the Britons completely, to ensure that no one would ever again dare to challenge Roman authority. This wasn't just about winning a battle, it was about winning the peace, Roman style, which usually involved a lot of very unhappy locals. The Roman administration, reeling from the economic losses incurred during your revolt, also moved to re-establish control over the shattered economy of Britannia. This involved not only recovering stolen wealth, but also imposing new, heavier taxes to fund the rebuilding efforts and the increased military presence. Imagine trying to run a lemonade stand after a hurricane, only now the government is demanding double the usual permits and taxes. It was a bleak time for the surviving Britons. Historians are still debating, but the internet and tea houses have confirmed that while some Romans argued for a more conciliatory approach to pacify the province, the prevailing sentiment was one of retribution. They saw your rebellion as a direct challenge to their Pax Romana, their Roman peace, which, let's be honest, often felt more like Roman pacification by force. They needed to show who was boss, and they did so with chilling effectiveness. It's a classic move: crush the opposition, then remind everyone who's in charge with lots of shiny new fortifications and very stern-looking soldiers. The Roman military presence in Britannia was significantly strengthened. New forts were built, existing garrisons were reinforced, and the legions were kept on high alert. This wasn't just about security, it was a visible display of power, a constant reminder to the subdued native population of Rome's overwhelming might. The Roman road network, which had been critical for their military logistics during the crisis, was expanded and improved, allowing for faster troop movements and tighter control over the vast province. Furthermore, the process of Romanization was accelerated. While initially it might have been a softer approach, the rebellion proved to the Romans that a more direct integration was necessary. This meant more emphasis on Roman law, Roman customs, and Roman urban planning. Cities were rebuilt, this time with stronger defenses, and Roman administrative structures were firmly entrenched. The goal was to transform Britannia from a collection of unruly tribes into a loyal, productive Roman province. For the surviving Iceni and Trinovantes, life under Roman rule became even harder. Their lands were confiscated, their leaders were either dead or in hiding, and their cultural identity was actively suppressed. They were a people utterly broken, their dreams of independence shattered. The brutal reality of Roman consolidation ensured that it would be centuries before any widespread, organized resistance of your scale would emerge again. The iron fist of Rome had clamped down, and it would not loosen its grip easily. The physical presence of Boudica may have vanished from the historical record, lost to conflicting accounts and the cruel efficiency of Roman retribution, but her spirit, her blazing defiance, refused to be extinguished. In fact, it was precisely the ambiguity of her end that allowed her to transcend defeat and enter the realm of myth. For the defeated Britons, your story wasn't just a grim historical event. It became a whispered hope, a tale told around hearths, passed down through generations, growing in power with each retelling. An official historical event that subtly reinforces this is the continued, albeit subterranean, reverence for native traditions and resistance to full Romanization among the British population long after your revolt. Even under the iron heel of Roman rule, the memory of your uprising served as a potent, if dangerous, symbol. Imagine the quiet pride, the shared glances when someone would speak of the warrior queen or the one who made the Romans bleed. It was a form of psychological warfare against their conquerors, a way to keep a flicker of national identity alive. Historians are still debating, but the internet and tea houses have confirmed that suppression often breeds deeper, more resilient forms of resistance, like a weed that grows stronger after being cut back. For centuries, your story existed largely in the shadowy corners of British folklore, a fragmented narrative known primarily through the Roman chroniclers, who, despite their biases, couldn't help but acknowledge your terrifying impact. They painted you as a barbaric, wild woman, a stark contrast to their civilized ideals. But even their condemnations inadvertently amplified your legend. You were the Britannic Fury, a force of nature unleashed. Your role in the Roman accounts, especially those of Tacitus and Dio Cassius, is critical to your long-term legacy. They were the ones who preserved your name for posterity, albeit through a Roman lens. Their detailed, if somewhat dramatic, descriptions of your appearance, the wild red hair, the torque, the spear, and your speeches became the bedrock upon which your future myth would be built. They couldn't simply ignore you. Your actions had shaken their empire to its core. The period immediately following your defeat was one of intense Romanization, a deliberate attempt to erase the distinct British identity. They built their cities, their baths, their temples, and their roads, all designed to integrate Britannia fully into the Roman Empire. But even as they built, the memory of your uprising remained a stark counter-narrative, a testament to what had almost been. It was like trying to whitewash over a particularly vibrant mural. Some of the color always bleeds through. Over time, as Roman rule eventually waned and new peoples arrived in Britannia, your story continued to evolve. It became less about the specifics of the battle and more about the enduring themes: courage in the face of overwhelming odds, resistance against tyranny, and the powerful spirit of a people defending their homeland. You weren't just a historical figure, you became a powerful archetype, a symbol that could be invoked by anyone seeking to rally against an oppressor. The defeat at Watling Street may have silenced your breath, but it ignited a flame of legend that would burn for millennia. Your story, like a stubborn weed, found a way to thrive in the cracks of official history.
For centuries, your story, Boudica, remained largely a whisper in the historical shadows, known primarily through the Roman accounts that framed you as a fierce but ultimately defeated barbarian queen. But then, as Britain transformed into a global empire, and as a powerful female monarch ascended to the throne, your legend was dramatically rediscovered and transformed. The Victorian era, with its romanticized view of history and its thirst for national heroes, was about to pull you from obscurity and crown you anew. An official historical event that kick-started your grand revival was the explosion of interest in Celtic and ancient British history during the Victorian era, particularly under Queen Victoria herself. In the mid-19th century, Britannia ruled the waves, and its queen, Victoria, reigned over an empire of unprecedented size and power. It's no coincidence that a powerful female monarch, the epitome of British strength and resolve, would find resonance in the story of another strong, defiant queen who fought for her homeland. You became a mirror for their imperial ambitions, albeit one seen through a heavily rose-tinted lens. Historians are still debating, but the internet and tea houses have confirmed that this rediscovery wasn't just academic, it was deeply political and cultural. Britain needed heroes, and particularly British heroes, to validate its own imperial identity. Who better than a native queen who had fought against foreign invasion? The Romans, of course, were conveniently recast as a previous imperial power, allowing the Victorians to subtly draw parallels between their own might and Rome's, while simultaneously identifying with the underdog Britons. It's like cheering for the bad guys in a movie, but then deciding they're actually the good guys because they're your bad guys now. Very convenient, right? Your image underwent a significant makeover. No longer just the wild, woad-painted barbarian described by the Romans, you became a figure of heroic stoicism and patriotic fervor. Artists depicted you as noble and majestic, often in a war chariot, leading your forces with a look of determined defiance. Sculptures like the famous one by Thomas Thornycroft, unveiled near Westminster Bridge in London, cemented your new iconic status. Imagine, you went from being a historical footnote to having your own action figure, or at least a very impressive bronze statue, right in the heart of the empire you tried to destroy. Talk about irony. Novels, poems, and plays romanticized your life, transforming you into a symbol of fierce British independence and courage. Children learned about Boudica, as your name was often misspelled then, a queen who fought to the bitter end for her people's freedom. This narrative conveniently glossed over the brutal aspects of your rebellion and the terrible vengeance of the Romans, focusing instead on your heroic struggle. It was less about the historical truth and more about crafting a national myth. The connection to Queen Victoria was particularly strong. You were seen as a historical precedent for a powerful female leader, embodying strength, dignity, and a protective love for her people. You offered a powerful historical echo for a nation proud of its female monarch. This reimagining of you, Boudica, provided a usable past for the British Empire, transforming a defeated rebel into a celebrated national heroine. You were resurrected, not just from the dust of history, but from the very biased accounts of your Roman conquerors, and given a new life, a new purpose in a very different age. And so, we arrive at the final chapter of your incredible journey, Boudica, not just as a historical figure, but as an enduring echo in the human story. Your life and rebellion, though ending in devastating defeat, have left an indelible mark on the tapestry of history, continuing to inspire, provoke, and resonate through the millennia. The embers of your rebellion may have cooled, but the legend continues to burn brightly. An official historical event that really emphasizes this long-term impact is the continued scholarly and popular engagement with your story, constantly reinterpreting and recontextualizing your legacy across different eras. You're not just a character in a dusty textbook, you're a dynamic figure whose meaning shifts with the prevailing cultural currents. Every new archaeological discovery, every reanalysis of ancient texts, every social movement seeking inspiration brings a fresh lens to your narrative. It's like a really old painting that keeps revealing new details every time someone cleans it. Historians are still debating, but the internet and tea houses have confirmed that the power of your story lies not just in the historical facts, but in its profound human elements. It's a story of courage in the face of overwhelming odds, of a desperate fight for freedom against tyranny, and of the enduring human spirit that refuses to be broken. You embody the fierce love of one's homeland, the pain of injustice, and the raw power of vengeance. You remind us that history isn't just about dates and battles, it's about people, their struggles, and their aspirations. You were essentially the original "You Go Girl" icon, centuries before anyone even thought of that phrase. Your narrative serves as a potent reminder of the complexities of history. The Romans viewed you as a barbaric enemy, a threat to their civilized order. For the Britons, you were a liberator, a champion of their ancient ways. There's no single simple truth, only layers of perspective. This ongoing dialogue, this constant reevaluation of your place in history, is what keeps your story alive and relevant. It compels us to consider the narratives of the conquered, not just the conquerors, to listen to the whispers of those who resisted.
Your name, Boudica, has transcended time, appearing in everything from historical documentaries to popular culture, a testament to your enduring appeal. You're a symbol of defiance for those who feel oppressed, a model of leadership for women, and a tragic hero for those who appreciate a good, albeit heartbreaking, underdog story. You were, after all, the queen who almost broke an empire. And almost in the face of Rome was still an astonishing feat. So, as we dim the lights and prepare for sleep, let your story linger. It's a tale not just of ancient battles, but of the unyielding human desire for freedom, the profound impact of injustice, and the powerful, ever-evolving nature of historical memory. You, Boudica, are a legend not because you won, but because you dared to fight, and in doing so, etched your name indelibly into the heart of history.
And so, my friends, we reach the quiet close of our journey through the echoes of ancient Britannia. Let the sounds of clashing shields fade, the cries of battle soften, and the image of a burning queen settle into the gentle rhythm of your thoughts. We've walked through fields of defiance, witnessed the spark of rebellion, and felt the weight of an empire's iron hand. You, as Boudica, carried the burden of your people's suffering and in turn ignited a fire that, though extinguished on the battlefield, continues to glow in the heart of history. Remember that fierce courage, that unyielding spirit that rose from unimaginable pain. It wasn't just a tale of queens and legions, it was a story of human resilience, a whisper across centuries reminding us that even in the darkest moments, the desire for freedom flickers brightly. Let the memory of the Iceni, of their proud traditions and their valiant stand, drift softly now. The Roman roads may still crisscross the land, but the spirit of Britannia, embodied by its fiery queen, lives on, a quiet testament to enduring defiance. Now, close your eyes, drift into slumber, and let the gentle hum of history lull you to sleep.